wasn't just a criminal, I was the boss. For over 20 years, I ruled the streets with an iron fist. People feared me. When I walked into a room, everything stopped. Conversations paused, eyes dropped to the floor, and even the toughest men held their breath. They knew who I was. I didn't need to make threats. People just knew what would happen if they crossed me. Bodies had disappeared. Businesses had burned. Families had been shattered. I built an empire on blood, money, and fear. Drugs, illegal weapons, extortion, gambling rings. I had my hands in everything. Cops were on my payroll. Judges looked the other way. Even politicians owed me favors. I had everything a man could want: power, money, women, respect. And yet, deep inside, there was always this emptiness. Not that I ever showed it. I was too hard for that, too powerful to be weak. But when the nights were quiet, when I was alone in my penthouse, when the liquor couldn't drown out the memories, something haunted me. I just didn't know what. But soon, I would find out. Because one night, I died. And I saw something that would change everything. It was supposed to be a celebration. We had just closed the biggest deal of my career. A weapons shipment worth millions had made it into the country untouched by customs or law enforcement. Everything had gone perfectly. I was on top of the world. The club was packed with my men, all drinking, laughing, celebrating our victory. The music was loud. The women were beautiful. The cash was flowing. It was just another night in my kingdom, until the bullets started flying. It happened so fast. 1 second I was sipping my drink, and the next, chaos exploded around me. Gunshots, screams, the smell of blood in the air. I saw my men go down, one after another, their bodies collapsing to the floor like puppets, with their strings cut. I reached for my gun, but it was too late. A sharp pain ripped through my chest, then another, and another. I stumbled, my vision blurring, my breath gurgling in my throat. I collapsed onto the floor, my body growing colder by the second. And then, darkness. At least, that's what I thought it was. But I was wrong, because when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the club anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere I never wanted to be. At first, I didn't understand where I was. The air was thick, suffocating, as if it were pressing against me from all sides. I tried to breathe, but it felt like I was inhaling smoke and fire. I looked around. The world was dark, but not like night. It was a living darkness, shifting and moving like it had a mind of its own. And then I heard them, screams, not just cries of pain, not just wailing. These were screams of pure agony, the kind that made my blood run cold. I turned, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There were people everywhere, but they weren't just standing. They were writhing in torment, clawing at their own skin, weeping, cursing, begging. I saw men burning, but never turning to ash. I saw others being ripped apart by things I couldn't even describe. Shadows with eyes, figures made of pure hatred. I had seen death before, but this was something far worse. I took a step back, and that's when I felt it. Something was behind me. I turned slowly, and what I saw froze me in place. It was a presence so massive and powerful that it made every muscle in my body tremble. It wasn't human. It wasn't even like the demons I had seen tormenting the others. It was something greater. It was judgment itself. And then it spoke. Not with words, but with something deeper, stronger, something that hit me like an earthquake inside my soul. You have lived your life as a king, but you are not king here. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was just final, like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. I fell to my knees, shaking. I had never bowed to anyone in my life. But now I had no choice, because I knew I was about to be sentenced, and my kingdom of crime had earned me only one thing: damnation. Suddenly, I saw every evil thing I had ever done play out before me. Every life I had taken, every family I had destroyed, every betrayal, every lie. And for the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of my actions. I had never cared about anyone but myself. I had built an empire on the suffering of others. I had reigned in darkness, thinking I was untouchable. But now, I was nothing. I was just another damned soul, standing before the one who held my eternity in his hands. And there was no escape. I wanted to beg for mercy, but I knew I didn't deserve it. I had never shown mercy to anyone. Why should it be given to me? But then, something happened that I never expected. The presence before me shifted. The fire, the judgment, the unbearable weight of my sins paused. And in the distance, I saw light. Pure, blinding, overwhelming light. It cut through the darkness like a blade. The demons around me screeched and fled, as if the very sight of it burned them. And then a figure stepped forward. He wasn't just glowing. He was the light itself. And when I saw his face, I knew it was Jesus. I had spent my whole life mocking him, rejecting him, using his name as a curse. But now, in this moment, as I stood on the edge of eternal damnation, he was my only hope. His eyes locked onto mine, not with anger, but with something that shattered me. Love. A love I had never known. A love that was undeserved, yet freely given. And then he spoke. What he said changed everything. I expected Jesus to look at me with disgust, to tell me that my time had come, that I would pay for my crimes, that hell was exactly where I belonged. But he didn't. There was no rage in his eyes, no hatred, no condemnation, just sorrow, a deep, unshakable sorrow, as if he had seen every moment of my life, every wrong turn, every decision that led me here, and grieved over it. I couldn't speak. My throat felt locked, as if the weight of my own sins had stolen my voice. I had never been afraid of anything in my life, but now, standing before him, I felt something I had never known before: shame. I had spent my life making men bow to me, making them fear me. And yet, here, in his presence, I fell to my knees without a second thought. I had heard about Jesus before, of course. My mother used to pray when I was a kid, but I never paid attention. Later in life, I heard his name plenty of times, mostly from people begging me for mercy, but I never believed in him. I had thought he was just another story, another myth for weak men to cling to. But now, there was no denying it. He was real. He stepped closer. The darkness around us recoiled, the flames dimming in his presence. I expected him to strike me down, to deliver the final sentence I knew I deserved. Instead, he spoke. "You were never meant for this place." I shook my head. How could that be true? Every crime I had committed, every life I had ruined, every ounce of blood I had spilled, it had all led me here. I deserved this. I had built my own hell long before I ever arrived. His voice was firm, but filled with something I couldn't understand. Mercy. I gave you life, but you lived as if you were your own God. You built an empire of sin, but I have been calling you since the day you were born, even when you ignored me, even when you cursed my name, even when you made others suffer. I wanted to argue, to say that I had never heard him calling, that I had never once felt his presence in my life. But as soon as the thought entered my mind, I saw the truth. Flashes of my past flickered around me, times when my mother had prayed for me, begging God to save me, times when I had escaped death when I shouldn't have, walking away from bullets and ambushes that should have ended me. Moments of hesitation when something deep inside me told me to stop, to turn away from this life. But I had ignored it. It had been him. He had been there all along. Tears burned my eyes, but I clenched my fists, fighting them back. I didn't cry. I had spent my life making sure no one ever saw me weak. But here, I wasn't the boss. I wasn't the king. I was just a man, a broken man with nowhere left to hide. Jesus extended his hand toward me. Your time is not yet over, but if you return, you must choose. Will you continue in your ways, or will you follow me? My chest tightened. I didn't understand. How could I return? I had been shot. I had felt my life slip away. And even if I did go back, what then? I had spent years ruling the streets. I had built my life on crime, violence, and power. Who was I without it? But as I looked into his eyes, I knew there was only one answer. For the first time in my life, I lowered my head and whispered the words I never thought I'd say. Jesus, forgive me. The moment the words left my lips, the darkness shattered, the flames vanished, the wailing screams faded into silence. The weight that had crushed me lifted, and a warmth filled my entire being. It wasn't just light, it was love. A love I had never known, never deserved, but was being given freely. Then everything went black, and I woke up. A sharp gasp tore from my throat as my eyes shot open. My chest burned, pain radiating through every part of me. Bright lights filled my vision, the harsh fluorescent glow of a hospital room. I was alive. I could hear the steady beeping of machines, the murmur of voices outside the room. The scent of antiseptic filled my nose. I was back. The door swung open, and a nurse rushed in. Her eyes widened in shock. "You're awake?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I didn't know what to say. I felt different, like I had left something behind in that place. My body was here, but my soul still trembled with the weight of what I had just experienced. The doctor arrived moments later, flipping through my chart with disbelief. "You were clinically dead for nearly 3 minutes," he said, shaking his head. "Honestly, we thought we lost you." I barely heard him. My mind was spinning. I had died. I had stood on the edge of hell itself, and yet, somehow, I had been given another chance. The door opened again, and this time, a man I recognized stepped inside. Marco, my second in command, the man who had been by my side for years, the one I had trusted with my empire. His face was unreadable as he stepped closer. "Boss," he said quietly, "you scared the hell out of us." I should have laughed. I should have said something cocky, something to remind him that I was still the king. But I couldn't, because I wasn't the same man anymore. Something inside me had changed. Marco pulled up a chair, his expression turning serious. "The hit came from inside," he said. "Somebody wanted you gone. We're already handling it. Just give the word." The old me would have wanted revenge. The old me would have ordered every traitor to be hunted down and made an example of. But I wasn't the old me anymore. For the first time in my life, I hesitated. I closed my eyes and I saw him. Jesus, the way he had looked at me. The way he had offered me something I had never known. Mercy. I took a slow breath, my voice hoarse as I spoke the words that would change everything. "No." Marco frowned. "No? What do you mean, no?" I swallowed hard. "I mean it's over. All of it. I'm done." Silence. Marco's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You're not serious." But I was. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't about to waste it. Marco stared at me, his eyes narrowing as if he hadn't heard me right. The silence stretched between us thick with tension. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Boss, I don't think you understand what's happening. Someone just tried to take you out. You're lying in a hospital bed with 3 bullets in you, and you're telling me you're done?" His fingers tapped impatiently against the metal chair. "You don't just walk away from this life." I exhaled slowly. I had spent years in control, always knowing the next move before anyone else. I had built an empire that stretched across cities, one that made people tremble at the sound of my name. But now, everything felt different. The power, the fear, the respect. It all felt so small compared to what I had just experienced. I had been to hell. I had felt the weight of my sins crushing me, dragging me into an eternity of suffering. And then Jesus had pulled me out, not because I deserved it, not because I had done anything to earn it, but because he had mercy on me. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. I met Marco's gaze, my voice steady. I said, "I'm done." His jaw clenched. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He had been my right-hand man for years, had watched me rise to power, had stood by me when the blood ran deep and the money piled high. He knew how things worked. Nobody just walked away from the life we built. Marco leaned in closer. "Boss, you know what happens when someone tries to retire from this business?" His voice was low, but I could hear the warning laced within it. "They don't retire. They disappear." I knew what he was saying. I had ordered men to be taken out for far less than what I was about to do. The streets didn't forgive weakness. The men I once commanded would see my decision as betrayal, as an open invitation to tear apart everything I had built. And yet, despite all of that, I wasn't afraid, because I had already died once. I had already seen where my choices led, and I wasn't going back. I took a deep breath. "Then let them come." Marco shook his head, rubbing his temples in frustration. "You've lost your mind," he muttered. "You really have. You should be planning your revenge, not—" "I don't want revenge." My voice was calm, even though everything inside me told me I should be preparing for war. "I don't want any of it." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. So, what? You're just going to walk out of here? Leave it all behind? You think they're going to let that happen? I don't care what they let happen. I swallowed hard. I saw something, Marco. I saw where I was headed, and I can't go back to that. I won't. His expression changed then, just for a second. Doubt flickered across his face. What do you mean, you saw something? I hesitated. Marco wasn't a man of faith. Neither was I, at least, not before all this. If someone had told me just a few days ago that I'd be sitting in a hospital bed, talking about Jesus and walking away from everything I had built, I would have had them thrown into the river with cement on their feet. But now I had no choice but to tell the truth. I died, Marco. My voice was quiet, but the weight of those words made him stiffen. I was gone, and I saw hell. Marco scoffed, shaking his head, but I kept going. I felt it, Marco, the fire, the screams, the pain. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just some hallucination. I was there, and I knew I belonged there. My hands clenched into fists at the memory. Every sin I ever committed, every life I destroyed, every drop of blood I spilled, it was all waiting for me. I was supposed to stay there. Something in my voice must have gotten to him, because for the first time in our years together, Marco looked uneasy. I swallowed hard. But then he came. Jesus. He pulled me out. He gave me another chance. Marco let out a low breath, shaking his head again. But this time, he didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. And now what? He muttered. You're going to be some kind of saint? I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what came next. I had spent my whole life as a king. But now, I had to learn how to be a servant. But one thing I knew for sure. There was no going back. I don't know, I admitted, but I know I can't live the way I did before. Marco ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to find the man he once followed. Then, without another word, he stood up and walked out. I didn't stop him. I just prayed he would understand one day. The days that followed weren't easy. Word spread fast. My crew, men who once called me boss, who once bowed their heads when I spoke, turned against me. Some thought I was weak. Some thought I had lost my mind. And others wanted me dead. They sent men after me. First, they tried to scare me. Then, they tried to kill me. But every time they came, something stopped them. One man later told me that as he aimed his gun at me, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Another claimed he saw something, someone standing beside me, a figure glowing with light. I knew what it was. Jesus wasn't done with me yet. I left the city, disappearing from the life I had once ruled. I had to. If I stayed, I knew I wouldn't last long. But I wasn't running away. I was starting over. For months I lived in hiding, searching for a way to make sense of it all. I read the Bible for the first time in my life, and the more I read, the more I realized how blind I had been. I had spent years thinking power was everything, that control was the only thing that mattered. But Jesus had walked this earth without a throne, without riches, without an army, and yet he held more power than I ever could. I found a small church in a town where nobody knew me. I sat in the back, listening, learning, changing. And then, one day, I finally did what I never thought I would. I stepped forward. I confessed everything. And I gave my life completely to Jesus. I had spent decades being the king of the underworld. Now I was a servant of the King of Heaven. I lost everything, my power, my money, my name, but I gained something I had never had before: peace. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Starting over wasn't easy. I had spent my entire life commanding men, controlling businesses, and making decisions that determined whether someone lived or died. But now I had nothing, no power, no money, no protection. I wasn't the boss anymore. I was just another man trying to figure out what came next. The first months were the hardest. I had disappeared from the world I once ruled, cutting all ties with the men who had followed me for years. I knew what that meant. They either assumed I was dead, or they were planning to finish the job. Either way, I didn't care. I had already faced death once, and what I had seen on the other side was far worse than anything they could do to me. I spent most of my days reading the Bible, trying to understand this Jesus who had pulled me out of hell. Everything about him was the opposite of who I had been. I had built my empire through fear and violence, but he led through love and sacrifice. I had demanded loyalty and respect, but he gave mercy to those who didn't deserve it. I had taken lives. He had given his. The more I read, the more I realized something terrifying. If Jesus had saved me, it wasn't just for my sake. It was because I had a debt to pay, not with money, not with power, but with the truth. I had spent my whole life leading men into darkness. Now I had to bring them to the light. It started small. I went to a church in a small town where nobody knew me. At first, I just sat in the back, listening. I had never been in a church before, not like this. I had been to funerals, sure, and I had made a few donations over the years to keep certain priests from asking too many questions about my businesses. But this was different. I listened to a man talk about Jesus like he was someone real, like he was still alive, still working, still saving. And I knew it was true. I had seen him with my own eyes. I had felt his mercy when I didn't deserve it. One day, after the sermon, I walked up to the pastor. I told him I had questions. I didn't tell him who I was or where I came from, just that I had seen something I couldn't explain, something that had changed me. He didn't push for details, he just invited me to talk. That's how it began. I spent the next year working to rebuild myself, not as a king, not as a leader, but as a man who had been given a second chance. I started helping around the church, doing things I never thought I'd do, cleaning floors, carrying supplies, setting up chairs. I had once been a man who gave orders, who sat in luxury while others did the work. Now, I was nothing more than a servant, and for the first time in my life, I was at peace. But I knew I couldn't hide forever. One day, I saw a familiar face. Marco. He found me outside the church, leaning against his car, watching me with the same skeptical expression I had seen the last time we spoke. I knew what this meant. If Marco had found me, then others would too, and if they were looking for me, it wasn't just to talk. I walked up to him, expecting a fight, but he didn't move. He just looked me up and down, shaking his head. "You really went and did it, huh?" I didn't say anything. He scoffed. "They're all talking about you, saying you lost it, that you got scared and ran off to play church boy." I still didn't say anything. Marco's face hardened. "You know how this ends. You walk away. You die. That's how it works. The streets don't forget." I nodded. "I know." A tense silence stretched between us. I thought he might pull a gun. If he did, I wouldn't stop him. I had made peace with whatever happened next. But then, something strange happened. Marco sighed, rubbing his face like he was exhausted. "Look, man, I don't get it. I don't understand how you just throw it all away. But I ain't here to kill you." That caught me off guard. He looked away for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what you saw." He hesitated. "I don't believe in all that God stuff, never have. But I know you. I know you ain't a liar. So, if you saw something..." He trailed off, shaking his head. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Fear. I had seen men terrified of death, of losing their power, of what came next. But this was different. This wasn't the fear of a man who thought he might die. This was the fear of a man who had started to wonder if he had been wrong about everything. I stepped closer. "It's real, Marco," I said quietly. "Hell is real. Jesus is real, and he's the only way out." Marco didn't say anything for a long time. Then, without another word, he got in his car and drove away. I didn't know what that meant. Maybe he would go back and tell the others where to find me. Maybe he would never speak to me again. Or maybe, just maybe, he would start searching for answers himself. That was the thing about the truth. Once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. Years passed. I kept working, kept sharing my story. Some believed me, some laughed in my face. Some told me I was crazy, that a man like me could never be forgiven. But I knew the truth. I had been forgiven. And that was why I had to keep going. Eventually, I started speaking at prisons, telling my story to men who were just like I had been. Hardened criminals, gang leaders, men who thought they were too far gone. I looked them in the eyes and told them that I had stood on the edge of hell itself, that I had seen where my life was leading me, that I had met Jesus when I least deserved it, and that they still had a chance. Some of them believed me. Some of them didn't. But that didn't matter. My job wasn't to make them believe. It was just to tell them the truth. The same truth that had saved me. One night, after I had spoken at a prison, an inmate approached me. His face was covered in tattoos, his eyes filled with years of pain. He stood there for a long time before finally speaking. "If he could save you," he whispered, "maybe he can save me too." I smiled. He can, and he will. I had spent my whole life being feared, but now I wanted something else. I wanted to be the man who stood between others and the fate I had barely escaped. I had ruled the underworld, but now I was working for a different kingdom. I was no longer the boss. I was a servant. And for the first time in my life, I was finally free. I was finally free.